Death was not the greatest fear of the Middle Ages. Betrayal was. In the 12th century, Europe was consumed by Crusades wars that dragged men away from home for years, sometimes forever. Knights left behind castles, titles, and wives, and for some men, the thought of absence bred something darker than faith. It bred obsession. This is the story of a fear more terrifying than death. And the brutal object it inspired, the medieval iron chastity belts. As crusaders prepared to march east, rumors spread across Europe like a plague. Stories of temptation, of unfaithful wives, of dishonor that could stain a bloodline forever. Some men turned to prayer, others turned to iron. The chastity belt-hand object whispered about in chronicles and legends was said to be the ultimate safeguard of fidelity. Early versions were brutally simple. Cold iron bands wrapped tightly around the waist. Rigid metal plates, often with sharp edges, sealed the groin and rear. No padding, no comfort, only control. These were not instruments of protection, but prisons forged to be worn. Once locked, the key stayed with the husbanda, constant, heavy reminder of his ownership, sometimes worn around his neck as he rode off to war. Imagine the reality. The cold metal chafing against skin with every step. The constant, dull ache that never subsided. The impossibility of cleanliness. Infections were not just a risk. They were an inevitability. Rust formed where sweat gathered, turning the device into an instrument of slow, agonizing torture. Walking became a shuffling agony. Sitting was a torment. And yet, the legends claimed these belts remained in place for months, even years. But how much of this is truth, and how much is a myth constructed by later generations to paint the Middle Ages in the darkest possible light? The historical record is murky, filled with more questions than answers. Few, if any, authenticated examples from the medieval period survive. Most museum pieces are now believed to be from the 16th century or later. Some even created in the Victorian era as curiosities or tools for moralistic storytelling. However, the absence of widespread physical evidence does not negate the power of the idea. The chastity belt existed powerfully in the medieval imagination. It appears in literature, in art, in cautionary tales. It was a potent symbol, whether it was commonly used or not. Its horror lies not just in its physical application, but in the mindset that conceived of it in the first place. This was never about love. It was about ownership. In the rigid hierarchy of medieval Europe, women were often viewed as property extensions of a man's honor, not individuals with their own agency. A wife's fidelity was directly tied to her husband's social standing and the legitimacy of his heirs. The chastity belt, real or imagined, symbolized a chilling belief that a woman's body required external, mechanical control. That trust was a fragile thing, far weaker than iron. That fear was a more reliable guardian than faith or affection, even if many of the surviving belts were symbolic, used for a single night or as a dark joke. The underlying message was deadly serious. It communicated a total lack of trust. It was a physical manifestation of paranoia, a declaration that a woman's will was not to be relied upon. The psychological toll of such an object, or even just the threat of it, is difficult to comprehend. It reduced a human relationship to a matter of locks and keys. So, where does the myth end and the reality begin? Modern historians continue to debate this. Was it a widespread practice, or a terrifying piece of folklore? Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. A few instances, exaggerated over centuries, became a legend that perfectly encapsulated the era's anxieties about gender, power, and honor. The device became a convenient shorthand for the Dark Ages, a symbol of its perceived barbarism and oppression. The fascination with the chastity belt has endured for centuries. Long after the Crusades ended, it speaks to a deep, unsettling part of the human psyche, the desire to control others. The Victorians, with their own complex and often contradictory views on sexuality, were particularly obsessed with the idea, producing many of the fakes that now populate museum collections. For them, it was a tool to moralize about the past, while perhaps reflecting their own contemporary fears. The true horror of the chastity belt was never just the iron. It was not the rust, the infections, or the physical pain. It was the belief that loyalty could be forced, that love could be locked away, that human connection could be replaced by a mechanism of cold, unyielding control. The real prison was not the metal cage, but the worldview that created it. History often hides its deepest cruelties behind myth and legend. But whether the chastity belt was commonly worn or merely imagined, it tells us something profoundly uncomfortable about our past. It reveals that sometimes humanity's darkest and most terrifying inventions are born not from the necessities of war or survival, but from the simple, devastating fear of what another person might do when you are not looking. And long after the iron rusted away, that mindset, in many forms, has survived. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of history's darker side compelling, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the past.